Hello, my name's Elijah Wells and today's review is Gin Sabalotus' new movie, Flow. The movie follows an unnamed cat who narrowly survives a great massive flood that completely engulfs its world and its home. So the cat ended up being stranded on a boat and picking up some wild animals on the way, like a Labrador, a capybara, a sanctuary bird and a lemur. And they must sell their differences as they sail across the completely new world that's just been completely flooded over from the massively great big flood, and of course, finding new situations along the way. From Latvia's own director, Gin Zabalotis, who became really historic in his own country. Not just he secured Latvia's first nominations in the Oscars, but he also won their first Oscar for the movie Flow. Given this is his first film in 5 years, and given that the movie of course did take itself 5 years to make after his 2019 debut film, Away, even though it did really well in the indie scenes in the animation, it didn't exactly get a lot of attention until more recently with the film Flow. And considering this movie was done through a free and open source software known as Blender, which is an animation software you can download easily and it's free for all, which is again really surprising given the movie costed only just not even $5 million to make, which is again incredibly surprising. And what's also really interesting is doing the story without any dialogue whatsoever. Yes, I am aware that dialogueless animated movies are, of course, definitely somewhat of a thing. Particularly, there's something like as recent, let's say, Red Turtle, which is again a really great movie produced by the late Isao Takahata. And of course, like I said earlier, despite the film's absence of dialogue in the movie does make up for it in massive troves of that you feel for the animals and their own predicaments they're in. Again, without any of them expressing a word, but usually using animal noises and grunts or any noises that are familiar, let's say a capybara or a cat, or a Labrador or a sanctuary bird or a lemur, like noises that are similar to these animals. Again, and how they would all interact with each other when they're all on the same boat, literally, and their flood has completely decimated their homes and all that, which is again really surprising as they all bonded over that situation, even though they never even said a word about it, and they all have their own personal issues and their own personal struggles, and they, of course, there are a couple scenes in the movie where they don't initially get along with each other, which is again really interesting, and how their actions pretty much can be really translated well without like any dialogue, like I said, like Red Turtle or Shaun Sheep. And the music in this movie is also incredible as well, as it does remind me quite a bit of like something like Brian Eno's Apollo album, as more ambient centric stuff that's less of a film score and more like you can feel like translates well as more as an ambient element, given how very scenic and very atmospheric the score really feels like, and how it really almost washes over you, which is again really nice to hear. And it's also, the musician is of course the film's director, Glenn Zabalotis. Again, he has some really incredible taste of music. Even though I haven't heard all that much about his other stuff like he done for music, but again, given this is his own DIY project he did, as in he essentially did almost everything in this film. Like he did the editing, he did the music, he also did some most of the design work as well. He also directed it, he did most of the story, and of course he produced the movie. And of course he even helped out with the film's cinematography, which is again an incredible feat, given that even though it does take a village to make animated movies in general, but it is somewhat even more impressive when one man pretty much does quite a massive amount of work he does here. And the animation in this movie is absolutely gorgeous to look at. Like, it's just incredibly beautiful to look at, and how incredibly scenic and very colourful, and how very photogenic the imagery is. Like, it just constantly just bursts into light with how like the color paletting, and how the lighting is very consistent, and how really neat the backgrounds really look, and how really gorgeous this world is. As in, the world is, in my opinion, really strange and really unorthodox. Like, we never know when this happened, what what era this place is. It could have happened like yesterday. It couldn't happen. It could have happened like the Great Flood, or that would be Noah and the Big Ark, or just a really big natural catastrophe like a tsunami or something. Like, it never is too clear when it happened, particularly with an absence of humans and like modern technology, which is again really adds to the film's world building. Like, it isn't meant to be too well defined, which is done on purpose. Not like something like when it's not well defined, where a director doesn't have too much of a clear vision of what he or she wants to achieve in that film. But I feel like the world building is both minimal and not well defined yet, but makes up for it for how incredibly lush and beautiful the world is. For him, the world is meant to be mysterious and vague on purpose, to the point it isn't too overly defined and has too much logic like bearing it down on it. And even the camera work in this movie is incredible in my opinion, as it does feel like a lot of the shots in the movie were handheld, just given the film's very claustrophobic and almost very chaotic nature, as you do see the camera almost completely jangle around, not to the point it's like a found footage film like Blair Witch Project where it just jangles around way too rapidly, in this one, what I find very interesting is a lot of animated movies have a somewhat of a really static camera work to it. It's usually because either it's just budget constraints or just way too much effort to be put into the animation, or just how you want to execute it. But given this is done by a free, easy to use software like Blender, where it does give you a lot more freedom to essentially enact a camera in more of an easy way to do it, which is again really interesting. Even though I did talk about the camera work in animation, specifically like last year's Lord of the Rings War of Rohirrim, even though it did disastrously in the box office, but I did really appreciate the film's camera work in the animation and how it was very creative around its use, despite of the many gashing flaws this movie had, in my opinion. But in my opinion, I felt like Flow, particularly in its somewhat notably very chaotic camera work, particularly if it's scenes where it's submerged under the water, is something really incredible of how Glintz definitely executes that. Like, how he gets that quality out of it. Like, how the mystery of the world, like I said earlier, is definitely stays intact throughout the entirety of the movie, particularly with the statues, like who made them and what they were meant to represent, or the big monolith-like statues or sculptures near the end of the movie, which are a lot more as prevalent, particularly in the second half of this movie, is definitely really intriguing, as despite of how dialogue the movie is, it does leave you guessing, and even in some cases leaving the interpretation up to you, particularly with the statues you see in the beginning of the movie, and as well as the massive monolith-like towers you see in the center of that world. Although incredible and pretty to see, it does add to the movie's ideas of symbolism, and just leaving the audience guessing at what the actual meaning of these big towers were meant to represent, even how Glintz wants to represent it, or which direction he wants to take it. Flow, in my opinion, is an incredibly beautiful piece of art. Like, the movie's mysteries definitely stay intact throughout the entire movie, to the point it just completely leaves you guessing about how the world operates, and what the symbols you see in the movie do represent, and what the logic behind Zimlodis' movie seems to go, and what logic seems to appear. And the movie's tension between the animals that we do follow, particularly the cat, and all the dangers that it faces throughout the entirety of this movie is incredible. Even though dialogueless animated movies are essentially always been prevalent, let's say Red Turtle or Shaun the Sheep. Again, but how Flow does it a lot differently is doing it in a perspective of a helpless animal without any help from the humans. Well, something like Shaun the Sheep, where it's done in the perspective of a sheep, but the humans are somewhat a little bit hapless and a little bit dim-witted, or something like Red Turtle, where the human is the helpless one, and he is surrounded by essentially nature, like a man versus nature classical narrative. But for Flow, it's basically an animal versus all the world's elements are pretty much colliding against it, and how the cat is working with animals to overcome their own obstacles and overcoming their each other obstacles in my opinion, a really gorgeous, thrilling and mysterious movie. So for Flow, I am feeling a 9 out of 10 on that one. So, what do you think of Flow? Let me know in the comments down below. Like this video, subscribe to my channel, follow me on Twitter and Instagram, Blue Sky, Threads and Letterboxd, and this is Elijah Wells, and bye.